All right, now you know what I think. I want to bring in Big Ten Network analyst and Michigan alumnus Jake Butt to get his thoughts on the whole college football playoff picture. But I want to start with this, Jake. What did you think of Michigan handling Michigan State at the Big House on Saturday night?
Wasn't perfect. If you're a Michigan fan, it wasn't perfect. If you're a Michigan State fan, I think you could say, hey, if you're a Michigan State fan, you should say, how do we start to play our season the way we play Michigan? Because it's the truth every year. They play, if this is their standard, when they play Michigan, they play a couple notches up. And if you're a Michigan State fan, a coach, a player, you got to start to say, how do we play consistently throughout the year the way we play Michigan? If you're Michigan, you understand what this game means. And to me, going into the week, it wasn't about X's and O's. It was about moments, and it was about overcoming adversity. And I think that's what they did. I think the Michigan team, the way they play football, it just wears on you. I think Blake Corum's a phenomenal back. I think the offensive line and tight ends are, if they were the Joe Moore award-winning unit last year, they should definitely be in the conversation this year. And, I think one thing too, RJ, is, coaching comes down to adjustments, in-game adjustments. And for Coach Minter, the defensive coordinator, his in-game adjustments have been consistently very, very good throughout the season. It hasn't always, Michigan State started fast. They were able to move the ball, but seemingly in every single game, the Indiana game comes to mind. Throughout the season, the halftime adjustments have been able to really shore up the defense throughout the year. And, if I had one takeaway as a Michigan fan, it's, hey, if we can find a way, if you're a Michigan fan, if you can find a way to emphasize and execute on the downfield passing, now you show you're a complete team, because this team is checking a lot of boxes across the board. They've won in different scenarios. And if I'm Jim Harbaugh and I'm this roster, I say, hey, why can't we play with anybody? Why can't we beat anybody? And I think that's the mindset they have.
Well, they've shown that, right? First with the win against Penn State, and now with this win against Michigan State. But Jim Harbaugh has also shown some things this season too. How important was it for him to bring that Paul Bunyan trophy back to the Big House?
It's so important. And, it goes back to the Ohio State game last year. A win is a win, but what's the gravity of that win? Is what does it mean in terms of your legacy? Because when you start to talk about the bigger picture, that affects your decision-making in game. And, the history of this Michigan State game, I've played in some crazy, crazy games. I mean, I've told this story before. In 2016, we were heavily favored on the road at Michigan State. We had a hand-foot-mouth outbreak go across the team in 20. That's like a children's disease. It's like, man, what are the chances that happens? Of course, it happens in the Michigan State week. So you go into this game, of course, the trouble with the snap, expecting the unexpected. And for the most part, it was kind of a very slow, methodical win where they just squeezed and ultimately beat Michigan State down the stretch. But it's a big win to say, hey, listen, Mel Tucker at this point had been the coach. He'd been the dominant coach, and Michigan State had been the dominant program since he got there in terms of Michigan State. And for Coach Harbaugh, this was the chance to say, slow down, guys. Like, don't get ahead of yourself. We're still Michigan. We still have expectations far beyond any given week. We want to win Big Ten championships consistently. We want to compete for a college football playoff. And I think a win like this in a rivalry game, when anything can happen across any conference, you put it on film that says, slow down, guys. We're still very, very, very good football team.
It's also interesting for me as an outsider to Michigan and Michigan football to watch how it operates as opposed to how the rest of college football might operate. And the reason I put it that way is I had my first trip to the Big House just a couple of weeks ago to visit and take a look at Michigan Stadium. And one of the things that happened at that Penn State game was the anointing of the Lloyd Carr Tunnel. Very big deal for Coach Carr to get his name put on that thing. And then we heard a little bit later on that James Franklin called it a problem following a loss. A lot of us kind of took that as, okay, if you think it's a problem, go beat Michigan. And then apparently there was a problem in the tunnel once again in this huge in-state rivalry where we know the Michigan State Spartans were in the wrong here. But I'm curious, as a person who played in both of those games and as a person who walked out of that tunnel many times, what's the layout like? What's the security like? And how difficult is it to keep those emotions in check?
So most stadiums, as you kind of walk into a stadium, you got your oval shaped stadium, right? On one end of the stadium, the away team comes down. On one end of the stadium, the home team comes down. You don't really ever cross paths, especially in an emotional moment post game. That being said, at the big house, it's one tunnel. Okay, there's one tunnel to get in and out of the stadium as players and as coaches and as support staff. Michigan's home locker room exits the same way the away locker room exits. But the way the schedule's set up, it's not an issue. And, I think the thing is, these moments happen. And is it a problem what happened after Penn State? Absolutely. Is it a problem what happened after Michigan State? Absolutely. Those are problems. It's also true that it's not generally a problem to the point where you need to panic and make any emotional decision here. 99% of the time, there's nothing. There's nothing. And I was at Michigan in 2013 when we played Ohio State. It was a 42-41 game. When we came out of our locker room, they came out of their locker room. There was some barking, there was some jawing, there was some back and forth. As a player, I can tell you, it's fun to have that as long as there's a very clear line drawn. Now, lines have been crossed this year, and who's at fault? We're gonna defer to other people. I think accountability matters, but there is a little risk of some of that. Understanding football is an extremely emotional sport, but I don't believe in emotional decisions either. That the big house has been the big house for decades, a century. So to say that two instances are all of a sudden warranting a change, I don't know that I'm ready to commit to that right now. I think that something needs to be addressed in specifically in the Michigan State game, because I'll tell you this, man, I said it all week. Part of what makes the rivalry versus Michigan State great is it's built on hatred. Part of the reason that thing happened after the game is because it's built on hatred. It's okay to hate somebody and play across the line of scrimmage and want to beat them and want to bury them. That's called sports. It's not okay for either side to let their actions cross the line the way the line was crossed this past weekend. That has to be a very clear line and emphasized by both departments and both coaching staffs. That's just the truth. And the leaders amongst the locker room as well. So I think oftentimes multiple things are true. And, I hope there's a very clear line that's drawn and emphasized in this rivalry going forward.
It's a very difficult line, right? Because we're also asking players to turn up and, quite frankly, be violent in a very quick amount of time, and also ask them to back down and be, quite frankly, gentlemen to each other, and asking for them to reckon with both of those emotions at the same time. It's going from fifth gear to first gear. You got to gear down. You got to gear up. There's a lot going on there. And I'm sure that there are cooler heads having conversations about maybe some other precautions that can be taking place when Michigan State, when Penn State are in town. Last year, we saw this also pop off when Ohio State traveled to Michigan. Michigan got the win. This year, Michigan's going to have to go to Columbus in what we think is going to be a de facto play-in game for maybe the college football playoff, but at the very least, the Big Ten championship game. What did you see from Ohio State in their comeback win against Penn State at Happy Valley?
I've seen it reaffirms your belief. If you watch Ohio State play and you've watched them for the past decade plus, this is Ohio State. There's this feeling you get even when they're down. And this is very rare. It's not true for every team. Even when Ohio State goes down, there's just this feeling that, Ohio State's going to win, and I'm sure even Penn State fans think that. They're like, all right, we got a lead, but you're waiting for Ohio State to win. And it's such a talented and a deep roster across the board that, throughout the game, even if they do flutter, even if they do make mistakes, even if they do find themselves down, there's so many guys across the board on both sides of the ball that if they just make one play, that's all it takes to break the game open. My takeaway is, if you want to beat Ohio State, you can't beat yourself. There's some teams you could beat yourself and still have a chance. Penn State beat themselves. There was some, critical play calling that I thought I didn't agree with. The interceptions and the fumbles, by Clifford, who's, I'll say he's a guy I respect. He's a competitor. He's tough as nails. But, if you want to beat Ohio State, you got to find a way to avoid some of those mistakes because the team's just too talented. And the thing about Ohio State is some teams find themselves in the position to capitalize on mistakes. They don't always do it. Ohio State has the guys that do it, and they do it on a consistent basis. So to me, it's a talented roster. Jim Knowles was probably one of the better hires across all of college football last year in terms of how can you elevate the floor and the ceiling of a team that defense is playing significantly better football. And, you mentioned the Ohio State-Michigan matchup, and we'll talk about Michigan-Illinois. It's going to be an interesting one, but, those two teams with all that's on stake. We talked about legacy early in this call too, is all that's on stake in this rivalry. For Jim, you got the monkey off your back last year. You beat Ohio State. What happens if you go to Columbus and you beat them on the road? How is his legacy remembered? How is Ryan's Day's legacy talked about? That it's a legacy type game. And that's what makes football so fun, is you're going to get to see two teams at their best at the end of the season.
We touched on it a couple of times. Ohio State, Michigan, November 26th, the game is going to probably be for a spot in the Big Ten championship and perhaps playing against an Illinois team that is surging. You mentioned Michigan, Illinois is on the docket. Do you think that Illinois, should they win the Big Ten West championship, has a chance to beat either Ohio State or Michigan in a Big Ten championship game?
So I really like Illinois' roster. And I think, I don't know how much the national media or even the Big Ten media watches Illinois. For me, I had the chance to cover them. I called two of their games. I called Iowa, Illinois. I called Minnesota, Illinois. And those were their two games where they really started to put people on notice. So I got to see them at their best. The hires, you can start big picture. Brett Bielema comes in, and then he hires Ryan Walters, a defensive coordinator. Well, immediately, Ryan Walters he's going to be a head coach. Whether it's next year, it's a matter of when, not if. He's going to be a head coach. You have a head coach coordinating your defense, and that defense is playing phenomenal football. You have Barry Lunny Jr., the offensive coordinator. Those are two key gets. You went out and you shored up your guard position with some JUCO guys. Bang, the offensive line's playing phenomenal football. You went and got Tommy DeVito, a quarterback, who at Syracuse was actually, he was a solid quarterback when he was healthy, but he was hit just about as frequently as anybody in the country. And I talked to Coach Bielema, and he's like, hey, they brought in Tommy DeVito before the offensive coordinator was officially hired. That's a big thing, because as a quarterback, it's like, how do you have trust in a head coach? I don't know who the coordinator is. I don't know what the system is. But Bielema said, hey, listen, you're a good quarterback. You just need to stay healthy. Well, one thing I do, and this is Bielema speaking, is I have a good offensive line. We're going to keep you protected. So DeVito took a massive leap of faith to bet on Brett Bielema and the offensive line, and it's paid off. And then what you have with Barry Lunny Jr., and I think as some Big Ten teams are in some coaching transitions and they're looking to elevate their program, especially on the offensive side of the ball, historically good programs, Wisconsin and Iowa. Brett Bielema has the same identity as Wisconsin and Iowa, where they want to run the ball. But what Brett Bielema did is he went out and modernized that. He got Barry Lunny Jr., who they're going to run the ball with Chase Brown, who should deserve more national attention at the running back position. But they modernized it by getting into shotgun, running it out of spread, complementing it with RPO and read option, complementing it with play action. It's a complementary system where at the snap of every play, all offensive plays look the same. And that makes it very, very hard as a defense to be overconfident on what the offense is trying to accomplish. So from top to bottom, the roster is great. The defensive line has three guys, Newton, Avery, and Randolph. They're 300 pounds, 300 pounds, 300 pounds. They run a 3-4 system. So you got a 4-tech head up on the tackle, a nose guard head up on the center, and a 4-tech head up on the tackle. Those guys are 300 pounds, 1,000 pounds across the board. Extremely quick. They got excellent outside linebackers and middle linebackers. They got Witherspoon and Quan Martin, two guys both in the top, towards the top of the country in pass breakups forced throughout the year. Kendall Smith is having a phenomenal year intercepting the passes. So, I mean, this is just, as I started to study them, I'm like, man, history matters. You kind of have to do it consistently to get that respect. But I'm like, this is a very, very good roster. And this team presents problems for a lot of teams. I don't think they'll be favorited if they do make it to Indy, but I don't think they should be written off either.
It's a very good point you make about Ryan Walters, who came from Missouri as defensive coordinator, where he got to watch what Dave Aranda was doing and took that front seven and decided to employ it at Illinois. And also to your point about Barry Lunny Jr., who came from UTSA, team was very high on 2021 and a team that beat Illinois in 2021. Brett Bielema said, I can't beat him, so I'll hire him. I'm inclined to give Illinois the benefit of the doubt, but I'm going to ask you again, do you think they can beat Ohio State or Michigan?
All right. I just want to comment on one thing you said, because you brought up a great point about UTSA. When Barry Lunny got to UTSA, they were like 120th in the country in offense. When he left UTSA, they were 11th in the country, I believe. So it was a significant improvement. And Brett Bielema identified that. He also said Barry Lunny was a high school coach. And what he liked about high school coaches is you have to be able to teach the game. And he thought that was great for college kids. If you can teach the game to a high school guy, you're going to teach it to a college guy. So I've always appreciated that. Can they beat Ohio State? Can they beat Michigan? They can. I'm not saying it's impossible. It's a very, very good roster. Will they be favored to win? No. On Illinois' best day versus Ohio State or Michigan's best day, I don't think Illinois wins that. I think Ohio State on their best day beats anybody in the country. I think Michigan on their best day beats anybody in the country. So I don't think they'll be favored, but I would definitely not count them out at all either. I think it's a very talented roster top to bottom.
I think that's well said, right? Any given Saturday, especially when we're talking about championships and needing to just win the next 4 quarters, I don't think any of us going to count them out, but it is refreshing to hear you say, hey, on that other side of the Big Ten is still very stout. And we're not just talking about the Big Ten. We're talking about anywhere in the country. Jake Butt, Big Ten Network analyst and former great Michigan tight end. Thank you so much for joining us here on the #1 college football show to share your insight. And I'm really looking forward to having you back on later this season.
Thanks, RJ, man. It's a pleasure.
Thank you for watching the #1 college football show. Please remember to subscribe to the channel and like this video so that you don't miss any of the best college football coverage in America.